Turn with me, if you will, please, to the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms. We take a practical lesson from the book of Psalms this morning. We are learning Jehovah Raha. I think it's so important that as we look at these Psalms, that we appreciate how he is pictured. And remember, just a few things in review. The Psalms were Israel's hymn book. This is the theme of this Psalms. The biggest book in the Bible is praise. And that ought to tell us something, because we as believer priests, according to Hebrews 13, are to be giving praise continually unto him. This book is a book of wisdom. It teaches the fear of the Lord, the understanding, the knowledge of God, the reverence of God. It fits that category as well. So it is one of the four books of wisdom: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, Psalms, are books of wisdom. I can think of no other book comprehensively that brings out the attributes and works of God. This book, I think, as you look at it entirely and you read it in depth, you will find the attributes of God brought out wonderfully, described, defined, examples. You'll find that here in this book. I know that David talks about his enemies and trials and hard times, and many times we're going through something, we turn to the Psalms for comfort. It is a book of comfort. There's no question about that. But we're looking at now a messianic trilogy. And all three of these go together to give us this picture. And I'm sure that none of us thought this was so much involved in that one statement, right? The Jehovah Raha, I shall not want. But surprise, there's more to it than you thought, huh? And when we look at this book, and we're looking at this trilogy, it is interesting to me in its irony that we have the shepherd, king, prophet, David was a prophet, of Israel, writing of the great high priest, the chief shepherd, and the King of Kings. David knew what it was to shepherd, both physically and spiritually. David knew what it was to reign as a king. David knew what it was to have a kingdom. David understood suffering. So what better author? Much like the person of Moses and Paul, what better person to take the children of Israel out of Egypt than Moses? What better person to evangelize the Roman Empire than Paul? So I also want us to appreciate that aspect of this writing. Now, we have looked at, we kind of went in reverse a little bit. We looked at verses 7 through 10. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He's the King of glory. And we have appreciated the fact that this shepherd, I shall not want, is this King of glory strong in battle. And these gates are definitely the gates of heaven. Now, in chapter 24, there is several verses of qualification. It's qualification of the worshiper, the one who comes to worship this king. There's qualifications. We've already had a touch about the kingdom on this earth, the millennial reign, in verses 23 through 31 of Psalms 22. This will be the heavenly reign, and understand that when we're in this section, there's a primary application to Israel. And I think sometimes we forget that. So let's understand that the primary application is to David's people in that day. Just as John 10, and I've heard preachers do this, they preach that like it's primary applications to the church. It wasn't. the primary application of John 10 was to Israel. Now in verse 24, about this king. And it's interesting what's brought out in verse 24. The earth is the Lord's. You know, some things have to be obvious to people. It has to be said in an obvious way. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. We'll discuss fullness in a minute. The world and they who dwell therein. Now the world here is not system. The world here is people. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. We have very specific words used about creation here, because it goes beyond just the original creation. He's the owner of the earth. He has founded it, established it, he maintains it. Who shall ascend? Now the voice changes, and that happens quickly in Psalms many times, and in prophecy too. We can be talking about foretelling in one phrase and forthtelling in another. Same sentence. We change channels for a minute. We have this very wide picture, right? And then we come down to a narrow picture. Now, I forget what they call it on the internet, but you can go to internet maps and you can get a very wide picture of Chillicothe. And then I can tap into David's house. I want to see what's happening over there at David's house. And I can get that focused right on David's house. I've never done it. I promise you. David? Not so. But I can do that, right? Well, I don't know what they call that, but that's what's happening here. We're looking at the earth. We're looking at the people that dwell there in the fullness of it. And then we narrow right down to this holy hill. It's the center of things for God, this holy hill. And who's qualified to ascend unto it? We're talking about His holiness again. Interesting how we come back to that subject. We begin with it and we end with it. You remember what Joshua told the people as they were to go in the land. That God wanted a holy people. Because He's a holy and a jealous God. Remember that? Oh, David, we will serve the Lord. And you can't fool old Joshua. He's around a little too long. Well, that'd be nice. How about you get those idols out of your tents? How about we start cleaning the house? Okay? But notice, verse 3. Who shall ascend unto the hill of the Lord? Now, when you want to really make somebody think, this is what you do. You talk about something very universal, big and specific, and then you hit them with that one thing. Okay? You move their mind to a pinpoint. And that's what this psalm does. We're considering the earth, all of the people that dwell therein, and then right here to this point. This is where I want you. Right here. Who shall stand in His holy place? Now, they're rhetorical questions that are answered within the psalm. This is the hill, this is the pinpoint place God is interested in. Why? His kingdom exists there. That which represents Him is there. That holy hill, that holy place, that's where He's represented. He who hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive the blessing from the Lord, the righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is the generation of them who seek Him, who seek Thy face, O Jacob, Selah. Let's discuss this. The earth is the Lord's. He intends to reign over the whole earth. It belongs to Him. We are merely leasing down here. He's created it. He maintains it. It's for His purpose. It's not for man's purpose. The earth is the Lord's. Again, sometimes things have to be said to us so we understand that. We lose sight with all the stuff we're getting hit from the media and from scientists, and we lose a little grip on that. Look in the book of Psalms 19. Verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament showeth His handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, night unto night showeth knowledge. There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, their word to the end of the world. In them hath He set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth like a strong man to run a race. The earth, the heavens, they declare. They give an official report. Declaration. The earth is the Lord's. Look in the book of Job, chapter 38, please. Job wanted an interview with God. He thought he'd have a dialogue with God about this situation, and Job got his interview. It was a monologue. Job was kind of put in place just a little bit. And look in chapter 38, and in verse 4. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Seeing as you weren't there, you don't know so much, Job. Now do you? Where were you when I did these things? Look in verse 5. Who hath laid the measure of it, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Wherein are its foundations fastened? The biologists, scientists, they can't tell you that. God can. Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut up the sea with doors when it broke forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud its garment, thick darkness, a swaddling band for it. Who did all these things? Who commanded them to be in place? Look in verse 13. That it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. It turned like clay to the seal, and they stand like an ornament. Verse 19. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all. I can remember when I was in school that everybody thought they were pretty smart about the Milky Way galaxy. Man, we thought that was the universe. We were real smart guys. Well, we got bigger telescopes and found out that God's a little bit bigger than the Milky Way. Now we got our hands full and can't explain anything. That's what God is saying to Job here. You think you can declare the breadth of it, do you? The earth is the Lord's. It was His possession. He made it. He founded it. He established it. The earth is the Lord's. Why are we being told that? He has a right to reign over the whole earth. He's the creator of it. He's founded it and established it. And the earth is the Lord's for His purpose. and the fullness thereof. Let's look in the book of Psalms for a moment, chapter 50. The fullness thereof. Let's back up to verse 10, if you will. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. The fullness thereof, you can get a gist of that throughout this psalm here. It's what the earth yields. It's what the earth yields. It's what's upon the earth, that's sustained by the earth. The fullness of it. That all belongs to God. Look in the book of Psalms 89. Psalms 89, verse 11. The heavens are thine, the earth also is thine. As for the world and the fullness thereof, thou hast founded them. The north and the south thou hast created them. Tabor, Hermon, shall rejoice in thy name. You have founded them. The earth, the world, the fullness thereof. The earth is the Lord's. Look in before we go to 1 Corinthians, look in Romans chapter 1. Did you know that the earth, the world, the fullness is for God? We can see that creation is called to worship God, the stars. Did you ever read the Psalms? Get in Psalms 90. Find out a little bit about worship. How the stars bow and worship the Lord. Look in Romans chapter 1 verse 19. Romans chapter 1 verse 19. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. And I do believe that's being created in the image of God. God hath shown it unto them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made. His eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. We're in the section of condemnation. Belshazzar was reminded of that by David. God, in